What is going on, guys? Welcome to episode number 41 of Not What It Seems. As you can see, I'm going to be doing this episode by myself. My excellent co host, Liam, will not be joining us in the near future. He's busy with some grad school stuff out in California now. So, he may be on every once in a while for now, or I might have some guests on, or it might be just some episodes alone. We'll figure it out, but we're still going to try to give you the best content that we can, and so let's just get right to it. Some Not a lot of news again. The CBA stuff going on, not really much traction there, but there's some news about a player who has retired. Last week we talked about Kyle Seager. This week it's a pitcher. Jon Lester has announced his retirement from MLB. What a career, man! This dude pitched 16 seasons. He was probably one of the last real horses out there. You look at Lester, probably like you look at CC Sabathia, Clayton Kershaw, guys like that, big lefties. But yeah, like I said, 16-year career, 9.5 years with Boston. Then he got traded to Oakland in the Cespedes deal. He was only there for about half a season. Then he spent 6 years with the Cubs. Then last year he signed with the Nationals, got traded to St. Louis, and decided to call it a career. So Lester finishes with a record of 200 and 117. Like I said, you're not going to really see many guys that are horses like that anymore get to 200 wins. 3.66 career ERA and 8.2 strikeouts per nine. His 162 game average. So he averaged about 206 innings pitched per season. 15-9 record. Again, record isn't really a huge thing that we like to look at today, but I still think it's important for these types of guys, stats to look at, because they were important when these guys started their careers. And he would average about 187 strikeouts over those 206 innings. Pretty solid. I think the biggest story with Lester, though, is going to be his postseason accomplishments. Career 9-7 record in the postseason, 2.51 ERA, 133 strikeouts over 154 innings pitched. He pitched in 26 games. The dude was almost always on a playoff team, from his days with Boston to the Cubs. Then he was on the playoff roster with the Cardinals this year, even though he didn't pitch. Listen, he was a 3-time World Series champ too. I think that really tells you what you need to know about a guy like Jon Lester. He won twice with Boston, and he won once with the Cubs. Obviously, he helped the Cubs break the 108-year World Series drought. He's going to be a legend forever in Chicago. He won the NLCS MVP in 2016 as well. He was a 5-time All-Star. And he finished in the top 4 Cy Young 3 times. He was the runner-up back in 2016. This dude never won a Cy Young, but he sure could have. I really think that Lester is probably going to be remembered more so as a Cub, just because of the curse and all that stuff being broken. But man, he had a lot of solid times in Boston. Again, he was pretty much the ace there twice in 2 of their World Series. Maybe he wasn't the number one at both times, but he was a big reason why they won him. Anyone who talks about Jon Lester says he was a great guy in the clubhouse. Really worked on his craft all the time. If you just think about some of the guys he's pitched with, Clay Buchholz in Boston, he pitched with Jake Arrieta in Chicago, Cole Hamels. The list kind of goes on and on. Obviously pitched with Wainwright. He pitched with Scherzer and Strasburg to start the year in Washington. Hell of a career by him. I think, you see the CBA stuff going on. Maybe that kind of had something to do with him retiring. He didn't know what he was going to get. I know we've talked about him a little bit with the Cardinals. His stats were there, but his FIP wasn't really there. So his stats were a little blurred. I think he was kind of starting to decline, as we saw with Washington and last year with the Cubs. So regardless, hell of a career. And listen, I really think, in my opinion, that he's going to be part of some Hall of Fame conversations. when the time comes 5 years from now. I don't know if he'll be a first balloter, but I think he'll be in the talks because of his postseason pedigree. I feel like he's got to be in the running, at least to get in at some point. So, congrats on a great career to Jon Lester, and we'll wish him the best in retirement. So, speaking of Hall of Fame stuff, I kind of want to do a little bit of a deep dive into this year's Hall of Fame ballot. Obviously, the day that we find out the voting is on January 25th. So a little about 2 weeks now, a little over 10 days. So, obviously, again, there's a lot of talks about PED users and guys that have been proven PED users, guys who haven't, guys who admitted it but never tested positive, guys like that got caught up in that testing back in 2003, survey testing, whatever you want to talk about with that. In my opinion, here's the deal with the Hall of Fame. It's a museum of the best players on the field. It's not a museum of your personality. It's not a museum of anything that you've accomplished off the field. It's a museum for people in 100 years that are baseball fans to see who was the best baseball players 100 years prior. And with steroid guys, in my opinion, they should all be in if they have the stats to back it up. And I think on the plaque or somewhere near it in the museum, it should say from this year to this year, this person admitted to taking steroids, or this person tested positive, or, I mean, the list goes on and on there. And I really just think that it shouldn't be just up to the writers, because they may have a biased opinion against a guy who made a wise remark towards them in a clubhouse after he blew a save or something. I don't agree with that. I think that if you have the stats, you should be in the Hall of Fame, plain and simple. Um, so to start off, I'm just going to go right off the bat here. I'm going to go with Barry Bonds. Should be in the Hall of Fame. I'm going to give you a list of all 10 of my guys. Barry Bonds is number one for me. Listen, Barry Bonds was arguably the best hitter of all time, power wise. If you want to bring up the steroids, go for it. But he had 762 career homers, 298 career batting average, 1.051 OPS. Bonds was an on-base machine. He had a career on base of 444, and a career slugging of 607. I mean, you got to be kidding me. This dude is on his 10th year on the ballot. It's his last year until years down the road he could get in possibly, but I think that he's going to get it. Obviously, they need 75% of the vote. Right now, he's about 62%. So I think you could see a jump of about 13% for him. And if you're going to talk about that, you got to talk Roger Clemens as well. Roger Clemens was one of the best pitchers of all time. We all know we all know the antics where he threw the bat. We know this, we know that. I think he pitched in big markets. He obviously pitched in New York for a long time. I'm a big Yankees guy. I really enjoyed watching Roger do his thing, even though there was a lot of stuff going on with the steroids. But yeah, he's another guy who should definitely be in there. Curt Schilling. I'm going to go with Curt Schilling, number three. Curt Schilling has about 72% of the vote right now. He was another man who was just a great pitcher on the mound. We all remember the bloody sock incident with Boston. We remember his great days with the Diamondbacks, him and Randy Johnson. And it's kind of gotten clouded now because of how people view the way he acts in his personal life. You know, I'm not going to tell you if I disagree or if I agree with him. Obviously, he said some things that the public hasn't taken very well, writers in general, anybody really. But again, if you're looking at this museum as a whole, he's one of the best pitchers to ever do it on the mound. And I think he's a clear Hall of Famer. I think what he's done off the field shouldn't really be a part of the reason why you do or do not vote for him. It's a museum celebrating the best players. So Kurt Schilling should be in the Hall of Fame as well. Then we'll go into guys who are kind of on the first year on the ballot, and I think that they should both be in. Number one, I'm going with A-Rod. He's another guy. He's admitted to steroid use. I don't think he ever actually tested positive before, but you know, it was obvious that he was on him. But what a lot of people say, a lot of executives say that when they first saw Alex perform, whether it was in college or in the minor leagues, that he was going to be the best shortstop to ever live. They thought that, again, we don't know exactly how long he was on steroids, but this is a guy who has 696 home runs, over 2,000 RBIs. He had a 930 career OPS. Also was a pretty great defender at shortstop, and then he moved over to third with the Yankees when Jeter was a shortstop. He's a pretty good defender at third base for us too. So I think if you're going to talk Hall of Fame with A-Rod, you got to put his defense in the conversation too. And a guy who didn't really have much defense to speak of here was David Ortiz. He's another guy, though, that I think should definitely be in the Hall of Fame. You know, I mean, just on his clutch postseason moments in general, the Big Papi was just unbelievable out there. He had big hits against the Yanks. I remember big hits against the Tigers when Torrey Hunter had to dive over the wall at Fenway just to try to catch it. I mean, his regular season, though, Papi, 931 OPS, 541 home runs, 1,700 RBIs. You know, I think obviously there was the little bit of speculation with Papi that had to do with the survey testing back in 2003, but he never actually tested positive. So I don't really look at that either way in part of my argument, but for anybody who does, he never tested positive to begin with for real. So that shouldn't be something that you hold against a guy like Big Papi. And listen, Edgar Martinez has become the first DH to get in. I believe it was 2 or 3 years ago now, I think Edgar got in. So he's going to open the door now for DHs to get into the Hall of Fame. I know Edgar played some third base early on in his career, maybe some outfield, but Ortiz did play first when he had to. Not that he was very good defensively. Obviously, whenever they were in the World Series playing in a National League park, they would usually have Big Papi playing first and defensively replace him later on, or they would just have him pinch hit. But yeah, Papi's another guy who should definitely be in the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. As a big Yankees fan, I watched him my whole life, and he was one of the best hitters, most clutch hitters. I know there's some stats that can measure clutch now, so look at those stats and tell me he doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. Now I'm going to go with some other guys who probably have less of a chance of getting in this year. And quite frankly, they may never get in just because of the way the percentages have gone. Manny Ramirez and Sammy Sosa are both on my potential ballot if I were to actually be voting. But man, Manny is at 28% right now. Sosa's at 17. Obviously, Manny has 4 more years after this year left, so he has better shot than Sosa does. Sosa's on his 10th year on the ballot, just like Bonds and Clemens. This is tough because they both had amazing numbers as well. Manny had 555 homers. Sosa had over 600. They both had OPSs above 850. Manny had an OPS of 996. Again, people are going to knock him because of the steroid usage and stuff like that. But to me, man, I don't see why they shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. They had the numbers to back it up. I know, again, personally, maybe off the field stuff, including the steroid, admitting that stuff, whatever, had some stuff to do with that. But regardless, I really think they should be in the Hall of Fame. So now to kind of back off of some of the steroid guys, I'm going to go with Gary Sheffield as a Hall of Famer. I think that Gary Sheffield really doesn't get enough of the votes as he should. He's at 41% about right now, and he's on his 8th year on the ballot. I mean, Gary Sheffield had 509 career homers, a 907 career OPS, bounced around to a lot of teams, played a lot in the playoffs, and always performed wherever he went. He was a really good outfielder too. I think he is kind of in the category of, I mean, he doesn't get talked about enough. He's kind of in the category of like, was really good, but there were guys that were better than him at the time. So he kind of gets overlooked a little bit. But man, Gary Sheffield had some big moments, big teams that he played for. So he's a guy who definitely should be in the Hall of Fame, in my opinion. Excuse me. Another guy is Andrew Jones, man. Um, I know the first half or so of his career was a lot better than the second half of his career. He kind of fell off a cliff there. So, you want to talk about peak years, peak playing performance. This was an interesting case, in my opinion, but regardless, Andrew Jones had 434 career homers and 823 OPS. Again, he kind of dropped off in his later years when he played for the Blue Jays. He played for the Yankees for a little while. Um, but when he was with Atlanta, man, he was unbelievable. He was probably, in my opinion, I never saw him play much with the Braves. I was pretty young then, but I did see him with the Yanks. He wasn't the same outfielder as he was with the Braves when he was with the Yankees. I mean, he was the center fielder with Atlanta for a long time. He could go get him with anybody, man. I mean, you put him out there with Mike Trout in their prime, I feel like they're pretty even. Jones may even be better. Jones was a great player. He's on his fifth year on the ballot, and he's at about 40% of the vote. So, he has some time to get there. I think people are just going to keep talking about how long was his peak performance? How long was he one of the best outfielders in the game? Because we see this with a lot of guys who have gotten in. The list goes on and on with stuff like that. But like at the time, was he a Hall of Famer during these years? And I believe he was. I do. He was amazing out there. And guess what? We're about to see his son probably in the MLB really soon. I think he's probably going to be a part of the draft this year, unless he's an international signee. I don't remember where he is at right now, but yeah, we're about to see Drew Jones and MLB pretty soon, and who knows, maybe he'll be even better than his dad. So my 10th and final player on my fake ballot would be Jeff Kent. This is a guy who I really don't think gets enough credit for how good of a player he was. He's on his ninth year on the ballot, and he's only got about 32% of the vote. But this guy was a second baseman. He hit 377 homers, over 1,500 RBIs, and an 855 OPS, 290 batting average. I know that's not something we really look at a lot, but still, I mean, for a guy to play second base for as long as he did, 17 years, man, he was a pretty solid player. He was, we remember him with the Giants for a long time. He was awesome. He was probably the start of like power hitting second baseman, in my opinion. Now we don't have a second baseman really that's not a power hitter. We even saw a guy like Cesar Hernandez bolster up his power last year. We've seen Robbie Cano have great power years in the past, Brian Dozier, DJ LeMahieu. The list just keeps going there. I think Jeff Kent deserves way more credit than he's getting from the writers. Maybe he was never like a superstar. Maybe he was never like the flashy guy on the field or anything like that. But I think he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Because as far as we know, he always played the game the right way, and he wasn't a steroid user. If that's something that people want to look at as a reason to not vote for somebody, well, that's not a reason to not vote for Jeff Kent. So I think he's a clear Hall of Famer. I don't know if he's ever going to get in. He's got 2 more years. That's a really high jump percentage wise to get up there. But that's my list. Obviously, there are some other guys on the ballot that will probably get in later on, whether it's, Tim Hudson or Bobby Abreu, maybe Torrey Hunter has a possibility, Andy Pettit. And then there's some guys who are on their first year on the ballot that I actually find pretty interesting. We'll probably get into these cases years from now, but Jimmy Rollins, probably a Hall of Famer, I would say. Prince Fielder would have been a Hall of Famer. I don't know if he has the amount of years that people would want him to have. Ryan Howard's another one. Tim Lincecum was the best pitcher in the league for a very long time. And then, I mean, not for that long, probably about a span of maybe 5 or 6 years, which again, is that a long time? I mean, you could say it is. Joe Nathan was a great closer for the Rangers for a while. Jake Peavy was great with the Padres and with the Giants. Those are just some names that we're probably going to hear. Hopefully they get enough of the vote to stay on the ballot, because I think you need at least 5% to stay on until the next year. So, um, this is just some interesting stuff. But my opinion on the steroid guys, man, put them in the Hall of Fame. They deserve it. Then put an asterisk, just like there's an asterisk next to Houston's World Series championship. There's not technically, but to all the fans, there is one. So, yeah, I mean, I think the Hall of Fame discussion is going to be pretty interesting this year, but I hope we get a lot of guys that are going to get in, because it's always more fun in Cooperstown seeing a lot of speeches instead of not too many. So, yeah, I got about 2 weeks, and then we'll see who will be in the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. All right, so moving off of some of the Hall of Fame talk for now, we're gonna do what we've kind of been doing the past few weeks. I'm gonna talk about some a roster that I think really should have done more than they did. And I'm going to be talking about the 2015 Pittsburgh Pirates. They had a 98-64 record, so obviously during the regular season they did what they had to do. But remember, this was the year that the NL Central had three teams with like 97 or above wins. So the Pirates that year were second in the Central. I think the Cardinals and the Cubs both also made the playoffs that year. And yeah, and then the Pirates lost the wild card game to the Cubs in Pittsburgh at home. That's always tough to lose a wild card game at home. Man, this roster though was primed for the postseason. I mean, if you just look at their lineup alone, not even looking at the pitching rotation yet, Starling Marte, this was before he kind of got caught with the PEDs, but he was a solid leadoff hitter, great outfielder. He had a 287 batting average and 780 OPS with 30 stolen bases from the leadoff spot. That's pretty much exactly what you want there. Then you had Neil Walker playing second base, 16 homers, 71 RBIs from a second baseman. That's pretty solid. Like we talk about power hitting second baseman. Neil Walker was on that list for a little while. Towards the end of his career, he kind of dropped off, but this dude had some power in him. Then this was probably Andrew McCutcheon's last like really, really good season before he kind of became the player that he is now. Not that he's bad now, but it's just a little bit of a different player than he was. But yeah, I mean, this year Kutch played in 157 games, so almost every game. 292 batting average, 23 bombs, 96 RBIs, and an 889 OPS. Also had 11 stolen bases in there. That's the classic Andrew McCutcheon that a lot of people my age will remember from when we were kids. He was just average, above average player, consistent. This is really what you expected from Kutch every single year. Then talk about a blast from the past. They got Pedro Alvarez at first base. Alvarez had 27 homers that year, 787 OPS from the cleanup spot. This was also kind of probably the last really good year that Alvarez had. He kind of dropped off and he's not even in the league anymore, but he was really good for Pittsburgh, probably from, I don't know, let's say 2012 through 2015. I would say he had a pretty solid seasons. I remember he was in a home run derby one year or two. Then they had Jungho Gong, who's a name that we probably haven't heard in a while too. I don't even know if he's still in Pittsburgh's system or not. But he was a third baseman that came over from South Korea. He had 15 homers and an 816 OPS over 126 games played this year. So he was pretty solid over there at third base. He actually moved Pedro Alvarez from third to first because he came over. Then you had Gregory Polanco, who we're still kind of waiting for to see what's going to happen. I believe he actually did sign with the team in Japan or Korea for this year. So maybe he'll be able to turn his career around there and then come back to the States. But this season, Polanco, average stats pretty much everywhere. He had an OPS of 701. So not great, but he did throw in 27 stolen bases. So when he did get on base, he was making some movement happen out there. Then they had Francisco Cervelli as the catcher. who hit 295 during this season. He played in 130 games. That's pretty solid from your catcher. 43 RBIs, 771 OPS. You probably like the RBIs and the OPS to be a little bit higher, but I'll take that from a catcher if he's hitting eighth in your lineup. It's not like JT Realmuto or Brian McCann out there. So then you had Jordy Mercer at shortstop, probably the only weak link in the lineup. 613 OPS, 3 homers, 3 stolen bases. I mean, not great, but this was probably the only under average hitter in their lineup. Also, what I thought was interesting was that the first 4 guys in their lineup, which was Marte, Walker, McCutcheon, and Alvarez, all played in at least 150 games. That shows you that they stayed healthy pretty much the entire season. I mean, like I said, Kutch had 157. He led the circuit. Marte had 153. Walker 151, and Alvarez had 150. So these guys were getting out there every single day, getting at it. And you know, this was a reason why Pittsburgh had 98 wins, to be honest. But if you look at their starting rotation, this was probably also the breakout of Garrett Cole. He had always been a solid pitcher there, but this year was probably by far his best season in Pittsburgh that he ever had. Pitched in 32 games, so obviously pitching 32 games, you're never on the injured list. He had a 2.60 ERA with 202 strikeouts. Then you had Francisco Liriano, who had 31 starts too, so he was towing the slab every single 5 days as well. 3.38 ERA, 205 strikeouts. So their top 2 guys both had over 200 strikeouts, which is pretty great for a stadium like Pittsburgh. Then you had AJ Burnett in his age 38 season, I believe. Burnett pitched in 26 games, probably had a 10-day, 14-day stint on the IL or something like that. 3.18 ERA. So this was, I think this might have even been his last season. I'm not positive, but he was pretty solid that year as well. Then it kind of drops off a little bit. They had Jeff Locke. That's a name I probably haven't heard in a while either. He had a 4.49 ERA. Not very good. Charlie Morton. This was before Charlie Morton actually became Charlie Morton. I know, I can't even imagine what would have happened with Pittsburgh if Morton had been the pitcher that he is now. But yeah, I mean, he pitched in 23 games. He had a 4.81 ERA, 96 strikeouts. 96 strikeouts from Charlie Morton. That's you're not used to seeing low numbers like that in the strikeout category from Charlie nowadays. Obviously, when he went to Houston, he kind of changed his whole philosophy, high fastballs instead of sinkers. And they also did make a trade for Jay Happ at the deadline this year. He only pitched in 11 games for them, but he was pretty darn good, man. He had a 7-2 record, 1.85 ERA, 9.8 strikeouts per 9, and he had a whip of 1.026. This was kind of what gave Happ the whatever contracts he got after this. He kind of got over there. It was like Jon Lester when he went to Oakland, or we've just seen pitchers like Scherzer when he went to the Dodgers this year, kind of just take the team on its back a little bit. Which is really, I just wonder what would have happened if Pittsburgh got to start out in a series instead of a wild card game, because they kind of got shut down by Jake Arrieta of the Cubs. If they would have been going against the Cubs, let's say in a regular series, it would have been Cole, Liriano, Burnett, and then Happ. And then, I mean, that would have been pretty solid matchup there. I would really take that any day. But if you talking about great pitching, their great pitching came from their bullpen. Mark Melancon was a beast this year. 51 saves, 2.23 ERA, 62 strikeouts. Then you had Tony Watson, who was the setup guy, had a 1.91 ERA, 62 strikeouts as well. Yeah, and you had a few other names. You had Jared Hughes had a 2.28 ERA, Antonio Bastardo had a 2.98, and Archimedes Camarino, I believe I'm saying that right. I don't know though, so sorry if I'm butchering your name. He had a 3.62 ERA, so those were probably their top 5 guys out of the bullpen. I'll take those numbers any day. Caminero also had 73 strikeouts, way more than any of the other guys did. So when he came in there, he was throwing gas and striking guys out. So the bullpen was definitely not an issue for them. I'll tell you that. Then you look at their bench. They had Josh Harrison, who I haven't even mentioned yet. Yeah, he was a bench guy, but he did play a ton of games this year. He was kind of the guy that played around everywhere on the field. And this year he had 287 batting average, 717 OPS, and 10 stolen bases. So this wasn't like his best year, but he was a utility guy. He filled in wherever he needed to. He was a pretty good player for them. Then you had Sean Rodriguez, who was also kind of like a utility player, moved around everywhere, played 140 games for them. I didn't realize he played that many games. Not great. He had a 642 OPS, but he gave him defensive versatility. So that's what they needed. Then they had a guy who I talked about last week. They had a Ramirez. They traded for him at the deadline in 2015. He played some third for them. He played some first as well. He had 6 homers, 33 RBIs, and a 712 OPS over 56 games in Pittsburgh that year. So when he came over, he did pretty well for himself. Not the Ramirez numbers from the Cubs or the Brewers, but still pretty solid. Then they had Mike Morse. That's a name that I haven't heard in a long time either. Long time national, and then he was on the Giants for a while, I believe. He had a 782 OPS over 45 games. And then their backup catcher was Chris Stewart. Not really much to talk about with him. 289 batting average, but only a 659 OPS over 58 games. Obviously, Cervelli was the guy there this season. So, man, in my opinion, though, I think that if they would have gotten past that wild card game, things might have turned out a lot differently. I mean, they probably could have made it all the way, in my opinion. If some of these guys got hot, if their pitching stayed the way it was the whole season, we could have seen any of those top 4 guys in their lineup just take it and run. McCutchen, Alvarez, Walker, and Marte. I mean, again, Alvarez was pretty much a strikeout guy or a power guy, but if he got hot at the right time, he would have carried them. Kutch would have done his thing. This Pittsburgh Pirates team was the last Pittsburgh Pirates team, I believe, that we saw that was really good. They're still in the middle of that massive rebuild now. Man, it's tough to see because PNC Ballpark in Pittsburgh is such a beautiful stadium too. I'm hoping that Pittsburgh gets good pretty soon. Because I've never been to that ballpark and I'd love to go there and have a good game, not just have a blowout with whoever they're playing. So but yeah, this 2015 team really probably could have done better if there weren't like 3 behemoths in their division too. They obviously would have. So you can look back at it, but any way you want to. It's just that's the deal. And they got run into Jake Arrieta at the wrong time. But I think that if they would have made it farther, if they would have beat Arrieta in that wild card game, who knows what would have happened. So that's a tough loss for them, but we'll see if they come back after this rebuild better than ever. All right, so last thing kind of get into today is throwback players. We can talk about a guy who probably would have forgotten about a little bit. He's obviously a commentator now for, I believe, for Fox, maybe some other networks as well. But I'm going to talk about Nick Swisher. Obviously, he was on the Yankees for a while. I was a big fan of Swish. So I'm going to talk about him from like 2005 through 2014. So he started out with 4 years in Oakland. Then he played 1 year with the White Sox, then 4 years with the Yanks, and then 2 years with Cleveland over this 10-year stretch. His average stats over these 10 seasons, he averaged 143 games played. So he was on the field for the most part. Maybe got hurt, maybe 10-day IL once a year, maybe twice a year. He had some days off too. But his stats aren't going to blow you away, but they were pretty consistent and pretty solid stats from a corner outfielder, DH/DH. Swisher had a 250 batting average, 24 homers, 77 RBIs, and a 798 OPS. He averaged these over these years. So, again, not really going to wow you. Obviously, wasn't like the best player out there in the corner outfield spot, but he had solid numbers. I would take that any day of the week from a corner outfielder if you had a bunch of other really great hitters around him. And his postseason stats, they're not going to blow you away either. His batting average certainly wasn't there in the postseason. It was below 200, but he had 4 homers in the postseason, 8 RBIs, 16 runs scored. Every team he was on, he played in the postseason, which is kind of interesting. He had 7 games with Oakland in the playoffs, 3 with the White Sox, 36 total games with the Yanks. That was when we were making the playoffs every single year, back when we had him, Cano, Teixeira, all those guys. And then he played in the wild card game with Cleveland in 2014, that they ended up losing. But yeah, every team he played for, he was in the playoffs at some point. And he was obviously a World Series champion with the Yanks in 2009. He was honestly a big reason why we won the World Series that year. Obviously, his postseason stats are what they are, but he was a big character guy in the clubhouse, had fun, kept it loose. And that's really what we needed. Every playoff team has guys like that. Every World Series team has guys like that. And Nick Swisher was a big reason why we won that championship back in '09 against the Phillies. So I'm always going to remember Nick Swisher. And I think that's what happens with a lot of teams, World Series teams. Their fans will remember the guys like that who didn't necessarily perform great, but they helped the team win in other ways. Swisher was also an all-star only one time, back in 2010. That was probably his best season of his career with the Yankees. So, again, this wasn't a guy that was going to necessarily like wow you out there or anything, but he was going to have his moments where he was having fun out there. You're going to remember him. He was a great teammate from what I know, from hearing guys talk about him in interviews and stuff like that. Um, so yeah, a lot of people probably forget how good of a player he actually was, though, man. 24 homers, 798 OPS from a corner outfield spot. That's pretty solid. I would take that. I really would. That's not superstar, but it's good enough for me. Especially with the personality he brings to the clubhouse and the chemistry he brings to the team. So now we're just gonna wrap it up quick with our stat of the week. So I'm going to give you a stat about Roger Clemens that's kind of insane, actually. He had 220 strikeout games over his career, but the amazing part about this is that they came 10 years apart. Um, One was in 1986 and one was in 1996. Both of them came when he was a member of the Boston Red Sox. I just think it's an amazing feat that he did it when he was really, really young in '86, and then 10 years later in his career, he was still good enough to get those 20 strikeouts in one game. We don't even see 20 strikeouts in a game ever anymore. So I think that really tells you how good Roger Clemens was. Again, if you want to bring up the PED usage, that's fair. It's up to you. But I mean, I just think that's a crazy stat. Even if there was no PED usage involved, it's still a pretty crazy stat. So I think that about wraps it up for us this week. And we'll see next week. I might be doing it by myself again, may have a guest on, maybe 2 guests. I don't know. We're going to have to figure it out. Liam might be on every once in a while for now too. So, stay tuned and we'll keep giving you some interesting stuff, hopefully. And we'll see you next week.